Ja, förra veckan så pratade vi mycket om otrohet. Otrohet från alla håll och kanter. En som har blivit utsatt för otrohet, en som är otrogen och allt vad det innebär av skuld och skam. Nu så ska ni få lyssna på en intervju med en författare som beskriver, ja, boken har kanske mest fått uppmärksamhet för att den handlar väldigt mycket om sex. Hausfrau heter den och många har kastats över den här för att läsa om de här sexbeskrivningarna. Men egentligen handlar det om en kvinna som en amerikansk kvinna som hamnar i Schweiz, är uttråkad. Fast hon lever i ett bra, helt okej äktenskap så börjar hon använda sig av sex för att bota sin tristess. Ni ska få höra vad författaren själv säger. Jag mötte henne, Alexander Essbaum. Welcome, Alexander Essbaum, to my show. You have written a book, Hausfrau, that has been controversial. A little bit, and it has maybe because it's a lot of sex in, and it's about a woman having sex, and she's also unfaithful to her husband. So you have all these ingredients, but to me it was much more. It's also a deeper story about a woman being trapped in her own prison, sort of. Could you describe a little bit about Anna? What is she trapped in, if you would describe it?
I think that's a really good way to describe it. She's trapped in this prison of, well, first off, she's in Switzerland. And Switzerland, if you come in as an expatriate...
She's American.
She's an American. Switzerland, Swiss German is a very difficult language to learn because it's not German exactly. There's not a written, or there's no orthography to it. It's not spelled the same way in every canton. It's not pronounced the same way. So if you don't know it, if you don't learn it, you can't understand it, and it's, you know, it's impossible to know exactly what somebody means. And also, if you just can imagine the geography of Switzerland, I mean, it's surrounded by these mountains, and it's also surrounded by the EU. You know, it doesn't even have the same currency, so it sets itself apart in many ways.
But Anna, from the outside, she lives a happy life with 3 children. She's a Hausfrau. She don't have to do anything because her husband, he earns enough. So she could just live a happy life, but she's not happy at all.
But she's not happy at all, that's correct. Her husband's very handsome, you know. He is a banker, of course, because he's Swiss, you know. And her children are lovely, and she lives in a beautiful home in a small Swiss town where she can look out the window and see the Alps. Switzerland is one of the most beautiful countries in the world, but her heart can't connect to that. And I find that that's a story that it's not simply an expatriate story. I think it's a story that a lot of women understand. When we hear the word housewife in America, or Hausfrau, we also tend to hear the words just. Oh, she's just a housewife. It's almost as if that's the implication, that she is no more than that. When, in fact, I mean, that's probably one of the most important, if not the most important job in the world, because you're in charge of taking care of the family. And since the beginning of time, that's what, I mean, that's the central, you know, relationship of, I mean, you know, more than who we work with or who we're friends with. It's who we build our family with. And yet she's made this choice to give herself this title. I will be a wife, I will be a mother. And in this modern age, she could be anything.
She gave up a lot of things too. If you don't even talk about it, but that's what people think.
Well, right, that's the implication, because she's moved with her husband from America to be here, and she doesn't have a job.
But she doesn't have a job, and she's trying to, and struggling really to learn the language. She has a mother-of-law that is not really easy to live with. And then she starts to see men.
Yes.
And she takes a big risk. Why do you think she takes that risk? Because she could lose everything.
You know, as I wrote this, there was no... the character came to me almost fully formed, and perhaps in the spirit of Madame Bovary and Anna Karenina, you know, there was no other choice. And I think that one of the things that she was searching for was attention that she didn't get from her husband. And there's nothing wrong, I think, with looking for attention, because we all need affection and attention, especially when we're very vulnerable, when we're lonely. You know, her heart, she even says, I think somewhere in the book, is, my heart is a bucket with a hole in it, and I can't keep it filled up. And whether you are a Hausfrau or you know, yourself, you know, or an accountant or a writer or a television host, if you cannot hold your own feelings inside of you and they fall out, you're going to try and find a way to keep them together. And there are many ways to attempt to do that.
And she chooses sex.
And she has chosen sex, because that's as close as you can get to another person without entering them.
But how does she feel afterwards?
Because she feels terrible.
Yeah,
she feels terrible because it's a false closeness. In fact, the only, in my opinion, the only real relationship she has in the book is with her husband, and yet it's not a relationship that can save her, because she only is in charge of saving herself, which she never does, because you have to be consciously in charge of that. And I think that's one of the themes in the book is psychoanalysis. And her psychoanalyst, Dr. Messerly, is always saying, Anna, you know, let's be conscious about this. You are in charge of this. You need to not be so passive.
But she keeps all her meetings with these men and the sex scenes that some feel ashamed of at the same time. She keeps them as a secret.
Yes. Because
she can't tell anybody about it. So she's stuck even with that, in this despair, sort of.
Well, I think I certainly didn't imagine writing about her admitting it, although it does perhaps come out in the book, because of course it would have to, because we can't keep our secrets forever. What is the saying? Truth will always out. But how would you tell that? Like, who would you admit that to? What would happen if you admit that? What would happen? I mean, in America, politicians admit to sex scandals. You can be a man or a woman, and it doesn't matter. Your careers are ruined all the time by saying, I have slept with that woman, and maybe that's just one woman, and she's sleeping with several men in here.
A lot of writers I've talked to, I think it's the most difficult thing is to write about sex. Is it?
You know, I had a very good friend and colleague. His name is Mark Haskell-Smith. He's a novelist and a nonfiction writer, and he gave me the best advice. Write it plainly. Do not use, we call it purple prose. Don't use grand metaphors. Don't try to hide the sex in symbolic actions. Don't talk about flowers opening up or anything like that. And just write it very plainly. And I tried to, and I think I did. And on the one hand, I think it is an affront to some people, because it sounds very harsh, maybe even also coming from a woman's perspective.
It's a male attitude, maybe, some think.
Maybe a little bit, which is probably sexist of me to say so, but it does feel very aggressive. And also for her to be approaching sex that way has a dirtier feel to it. And I think it adds to that she doesn't find beauty in it. She's using it as a tool.
Instead of drugs, we were talking about drugs, taking pills, or whatever people do to kind of feel better in a situation that she's in. But how was it received in your own home country, the U.S.? Because you said it was really divided.
Yes, yes. On the one hand, there have been a lot of people that have contacted me and said it's been very meaningful to them because it's given them a voice, because I've said things that I've been able to put into words, some things that they think a lot of women feel, including themselves. On the other hand, there have been people that have just found a lot of fault with this character, and that, you know, she's to blame for her own actions, or that, you know, maybe the book moralizes a little bit, but I think that that's actually a very facile interpretation of the book, because in no way does the book say she's being punished for her actions. I believe that what the book clearly intends and it points to is that her unconsciousness is what causes her downfall.
But this takes place now, today.
Yes.
Madame Bovary or Anna Karenina is another time, another period of time. But still you can get the feeling of being stuck. You're closed in, sort of. We were talking about before that it's even worse today maybe to admit that you don't have a good and happy life. You have 3 children, you have everything you need, and still you're not happy, you're bored, and you feel closed in. And we were talking about Facebook and all that.
Yes. Well, you know, for example, especially right now in Europe, we have this terrible refugee crisis,
exactly
for example. And, you know, we see people on the news and they have nothing, and their clothes are falling off of them. They're crying. They have no place to live. They have no home. Their children are dying. That horrible photograph of that little boy who had drowned, and you know, and then we have what we call problems, right? Because we are dissatisfied with our life, or we feel very unsettled inside. And I believe I read a statistic. I did read it. I don't know if it's true. This was years ago, that Switzerland, for example, has a higher suicide rate than Uzbekistan, which seems very incongruous. And yet, if you think about it, if you're in a country where you're fighting to survive, you're not going to worry about these little things because you're fighting.
You're focused on to survive.
Exactly. And so on the one hand, it's how you call it, a first world problem. On the other hand, it is a problem because it's these things that keep us sometimes from opening ourselves to these greater needs in the world. I hesitate to say she's a full-blown narcissist because I think she's not. I think that there are caring aspects to her. She has flashes of, I mean, the first line in the book is she was a good wife, mostly, and you know, she has flashes of deep kindness to her children and to the people that she tends to allow as friends who are close to her. And yet, she's broken. You know, if you buy something from on the internet and it comes to you in the box and you open it and it's already broken, I feel like she came to us as a broken woman. She came into the world and something was not quite right. And if you arrive in your body as a little bit off, if that's your nature, what next? And if you put yourself in a position that is not conducive to being well or to being healthy, then how do you pull yourself out of that spiral?
It's interesting because we have a high suicide rate here too in Sweden, and we are supposed to be one of the richest countries in the world, but still people are unhappy.
Yes.
So we could sit and talk about this forever, but it's very interesting because sometimes you get the feeling it's a lot about sex, but it's a lot about just these kind of problems too, really.
I think so, and I think, you know, between the psychology of the book and the sex, I mean, the sex is the examination of the psychology and the relationships. And I think, you know, as we were mentioning, it could be anything. It could be pills, and it could take place anywhere.
Thank you so much for coming in. I hope people would read it and discuss it, because it's a lot of things to discuss and debate.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.